want a revolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world.
All right, my friends, we're back. 508-755-0058. I'm really happy to have an old friend of mine on the show tonight. I shouldn't say old, because, we're not old. But he's retired justice of the juvenile court, first justice of the juvenile court, Judge Luis Perez, and welcome. And let me tell everybody that Judge Perez and I knew Judge Perez before he was Judge Perez. And he was the first Latino appointment in the juvenile court system. You might have been the first Latino judge.
I was the first Puerto Rican judge.
First Puerto Rican judge. And Mike Dukakis appointed you.
Mike Dukakis.
And a long time ago. He was a young man at that time, and he served eloquently in the position. And he's been an advocate in this community. He's not one of these. It maybe people don't. He didn't. Play the judge's role off. Didn't write legislation off. On the chair, but he has been part of this community, the fabric of this community, and it's sometimes the conscience of this community in a lot of issues. Sometimes you and I butted heads on those issues, but we got there. We always got there at the end, and that's what's great. So thanks for coming up and spending some time with us.
No, thank you for the invitation.
Love to have you here. Let's talk about yesterday's election, because you quoted all over the paper this morning. You're like me. You can't stay out of the paper sometimes. You get yourself into these things. What happened down there? I mean, there seemed to be, at least from my reading, and I wasn't down there. We talked to Geraldo Alicia during I guess just the day before the election. We talked to his opponent the day before the election. By the way, we got an email, just for your edification, that Mike picked up yesterday at 4:22 from the other opponent, which is now over with, talking about campaign finance irregularities and all this stuff that we should have. Excuse me, we took care of that. That went into the basket. But there was evidently a group down there that put up a billboard, and I don't know what else they did. Maybe you can edify this a little bit for us. And talked about showing identification when going to vote, which is not part of the United States Constitution right now, or part of the laws of the United States of America. Whether it should be or not, that's another debate for another day. So what happened down there? I mean, you were an observer yesterday. Were there really transgressions going on?
Yeah. First of all, on Sunday, I was in Southbridge going house to house, knocking at doors, making sure that people would vote on Tuesday, the primary, because it was a very important race. And I was shown a sign where the billboard in the heart of the Latino community, making people saying that volunteer to show your ID. So I said, why are they doing this? And I found out it was the Empowerment to Vote organization. And so we worked through it. And then on the election day, I was to observe what was going on to make sure everything was above the law, to make sure that nothing would ever happen again, that we needed to go back into court for an election. Democracy, probably the best situation within the democracy that we live in is the right to vote. And
absolutely.
We did not want to, we wanted to make sure that people would have no intimidation, that nobody would being asked to show their ID, because that gave us some fire into that issue, that they were going to come in, people were going to come in and ask people to show their ID to vote. That's not the way the law is written in Massachusetts. So I was there for that purpose, to make sure that the law was adhered to. So the day in the morning, 7 o'clock, I was there, and it began. It began to question their identification of people.
Now, who was asking for the identification? Actually, poll workers?
People that were observers for the organizations that I just mentioned, the Empowered to Vote.
Inside the polling booth?
Not inside the polling booth. As soon as you walk in, you have to declare yourself either Republican, who you are.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, you
go to the first desk.
First desk.
Okay.
And you say, my name is Luis Perez.
Right.
I am a Democrat.
Okay.
And so then a person who was an observer for the organization Empowered to Vote would challenge my identity and said, I am challenging Luis Perez's identity. He has to show me the ID, circumventing the law. And
that was actually going on.
That was actually going on at the beginning. And as soon as people were everyone was being challenged. And it was chaos at the
Were they just challenging the Latino people, or were they challenging everybody? Just Latinos.
Latinos. And that's all they were challenging until...
I mean, you're not colorblind. I've known you a long time.
Exactly.
And you're not ethnic blind. And I understand what your advocacy is all about. And that's where you're at. And I understand that. And everyone else should understand that. So, I mean, you know what you're talking about.
Yes, I was right there.
Okay.
And I was involved in all the challenges. And so that was corrected. We were very fortunate that we had very talented individuals that were hired by the city of Southbridge.
Okay.
Because Southbridge was well prepared for this. It was coming, and they saw the billboard. Something was already ready to start.
So the voting of people that were employed by Southbridge were there to correct this deficiency right away.
Exactly.
Okay.
And immediately the town council came on board. The clerk said you cannot challenge for that purpose. And if you're challenging because of their identification, you have to have cause that you know that person's not Huisperes. And so that was corrected. So the other challenges that began to work through, I mean, we have people that were mentally challenged also being challenged, because according to these individuals, that they did not have the capacity to vote.
It's not their call.
It's not their call. So it began.
I mean, there's not even a provision in state law that says that you're not. There's no mental capacity rules and regulations in the voting rules.
That's right. So we were also very fortunate that Secretary of State sent a lawyer to be present.
Smart move.
It was a smart move. As soon as the Attorney General's office came in around 11:30, everything started getting smoother, because now we had a person there that had the law on his side. And so in the afternoon, he got into a situation about the mental health issues, but that was corrected because of what you just said. And so that was corrected. After a while, it's smooth. I've talked to people within the Southbridge community, and they had never seen anything like this. Their people were intimidated. People walked out of there frustrated. People say, "I'm not coming back," and that was my concern. That because you're a voter, there was a young lady that was the first time voting, and she was questioned, and I go, "Why are you questioning her identity? For what purpose?" And so she was able to vote. But I'm concerned that young lady that went through that frustration because of her identification, she had to show her ID, and because she was challenged, that will she be back because of this process?
Not.
Exactly.
Maybe not. She could be soured out in the whole thing. So and, everyone ought to understand, everyone has to go register to vote. And we have ability to register to vote when you get your driver's license in Massachusetts. But everyone has to register to vote. And at the point of registering to vote, you have to prove who you are. And that's it. That's the law. After that, no one has a right to challenge you unless they're going to say they know that you're not Jordan Levy, and they can go up to the clerk or the warden in the voting area and say, "I know this man's a fraud." Well, you're accusing me of a fraud. Well, that's fine. You better be in a position to prove that. But there is no criteria here to ask for any identification. I mean, that's the old poll tax days that we had. Where you had to pay to vote, and God, we've matured. And I understand the general rationale that people want to use to legitimize this is that the illegal people that are not registered to vote are going to vote. And they had the Colorado case recently with 6,000 people. That hasn't been proven yet, by the way. So I understand all that. Politics of this.
Right. And people should be aware that most of the Latinos in Southbridge is an old Latino population.
One of the oldest
in the
ones.
50s.
Yeah. I remember campaigning out there when I ran for governor's council.
Right. So most of them are Puerto Ricans. Puerto Ricans are United States citizens as we were born.
That's right. You have a right to travel back and forth all day long because it happens to be the United States.
Exactly. So it was kind of funny because it's asking for identification because people felt that they were illegals. And they're not illegals. Most of that community has been stabilized there for many, many, many years. And so they're part of that community. It's a large number. I mean, if you look at the trends of the population, the census populations, you look at Southbridge, and you look at the public school systems, there are about 45% Latino population in the public schools in Southbridge right now.
And have been right along, but it's a growing population, but it has been right along. I mean, there's been a large population. They worked in the factories there for many, many years.
American Optical.
American Optical was a major employer out there, and that's why many people came to Southbridge. They lived there. They own homes there. They raised their families there. They go to the churches there. That's been part of the fabric of Southbridge. Has been all the way through. So that's kind of shocking. All right, let's get off of that one, and let's talk a little education.
Okay.
Because this is something that's really been near and dear to you since I first known you as a young guy, that you were involved in as a lawyer, and when we had the bilingual pacts in Worcester, and Worcester struggled, folks. Worcester really struggled. I guess with every ethnic group that came here, we struggled. I don't know about all the histories because I was just a little boy when, my forefathers got over here, and I'm sure they struggled and went through the same things. And I know the Irish struggled and other nationalities struggled. We struggled in public education as we started to have more and more, basically Puerto Rican at that time, students come here and did not speak English. They didn't speak well. And we suddenly had a lot of kids hitting the schools, and we had a very white-oriented, European-based understanding of what education was all about. And we had a tough time. And a lot of us had a learning curve. A lot of us, I had a big learning curve. It took a while to get there. Not to patronize, but to understand the difficulties. And then we started with the comparisons. We had large Greek infusion of people coming in. We had more and more of the bilingual pacts that dealt. So I just want to give people a little bit of a history on this thing. This was not an easy place to go. We're still now we have a large influx of people who are Spanish-speaking people. They're not basically Puerto Rican any longer, Central and South American that are in here. We have a major problem, education-wise. And there's a law in Massachusetts on immersion. But we're also under a federal
consent
decree based on where we were back in my day. To be honest with you, we started it. Okay, you and I started it, and the federal courts came in here and said, "Hey, this is the way it's going to be done." Okay, so where do we go now? We have some new educational opportunities out there. I'm already getting calls about people, what kind of thing we're going to be doing here, and why aren't we teaching these kids English? Let's talk a little bit about it.
Okay. It's not easy coming in from another country that you do not understand the language. For example, when I came in 1959 to Worcester, because my family was one of the first Puerto Rican families to migrate to the Worcester area, and I lived on Kelly Square, I was dropped 2 grades because I was not able to speak English. So that was one of my first experiences, and I was...
That's a big social kick.
No kidding. No kidding.
I can imagine.
Yeah. I was 2 years was taken away from me, literally, overnight. So I always had the passion about how do we put ourselves in a situation that we have to understand and be sensitive to these new migrants that are coming into our society that do not speak the language of our majority language. And how do we deal with that type of education? Do we do it the way it was done to me, or do we have a better sense? And so I got involved in the bilingual movement way back then, and that movement came out with the transitional education package, that we transitioned the kids in what I call the philosophical approach of transition. It was a good way of transitioning kids into the mainstream. That we want them to learn English because this is an English-speaking country. And if you want to be successful, you have to learn English. You're not going to be successful.
We'll stay in poverty.
Hey, you will stay down forever. So you have to build a system where the child is given an opportunity to transition into our society. So with the capacity to transition, the quality of education that we should be receiving, so they were able to succeed in our society. So I got into that movement back in the 60s and 70s, and that's where you and I began to hit in different points of view.
Yep.
And
we went at it pretty good.
We certainly did. We had even to take it to court to be able to get you to the point of view that we wanted to make sure that the quality of education.
And I just want you to know, I went kicking and screaming.
The quality of education for our children, and that was that debate in Worcester was the most interesting debate, where people like you and I continue to have that debate because we want to make sure that each child is educated in an appropriate way. So the bilingual movement, because the UNS initiative came in and said, in Massachusetts, we cannot have bilingual education. We want to throw these kids into the water, let them swim, and let them either fail or succeed, which is what I call idiotic way of handling this issue, because we're all concerned about the quality of education that child is receiving. So these kids now, because of this initiative, are thrown right there. 1 year, succeed, or you're out. And that's unfair.
Hold the thought. We'll take a quick break. Judge Luis Perez is going to stay with us. We're going to talk some more. This is really a critical issue, folks. This is about where we are, where public education is going. And Worcester has been in the focal point of this right off the bat. So we've got a lot of history here. We'll be right back.
Hi, Rich Carr here. Join me for the Financial Freedom Show on Saturdays, 9 a.m. here on